It's Monday. I'm very excited. Whew, wow, talk about some exciting news, eh? Our audience, now that we've started using this other traffic tracking software for our podcast, we can actually get a better idea of how many of you are out there, how many people are in the Dualistic Unity community, and how many people are amongst all the 200 plus episodes that now exist. There's 10,000 of us wandering amongst the Dualistic Unity episodes on the podcast alone, not to mention YouTube, of course. So that's really exciting that there is the potential for thousands of conversations. I mean, how many variations are there in 10,000 people? I mean, you can run into each other, you can connect on Discord. Hell, you could come to one of our Patreon groups and talk to one another. This is great. It's a growing conversation. And then, of course, it's not like those 10,000 people are just talking to each other. They're out there in the world asking questions that maybe they were a little bit more hesitant to ask before, or, poking the bear from time to time because they're not as afraid and finding out what they're capable of doing. That's so exciting. Wow.
Yeah, it's fucking awesome because it really, like, this conversation is what happens. Like, variations of this conversation is what happens when you're relaxed, when you're not trying to get somewhere, when you're just chilling out with people, when you're just chilling out with some friends and you're not necessarily, there's not so many distractions. You're not watching a sports game. You're not talking about what's going to happen later. And even, like at parties and stuff, like I love bringing up these conversations, and it's kind of, I have an easy segue because everyone asks like, oh, what do you do? What do you do for work? Whatever. And it's like podcast, and depending how I want to play it, like, oh, what's the podcast about? Guaranteed question. And I have my different responses, but it usually leads to some sort of conversation. And depending on how the conversation had gone previously or my sense of the person, I'll give a different sort of answer as to what the podcast is about. But yeah, and sometimes I'll just throw it all out there and just see what sticks, and kind of like progressively get deeper with my explanation as I'm talking through it. Like, yeah, you're whole and complete as you are, and through that you may recognize yourself in other people and see that we're not quite so different, and eventually recognize that maybe you're just it, and we're sitting in eternity here. And but yeah, usually hanging in the you're whole and complete as you are. You don't have to be anything else other than what you are. You don't have to become something more. You're already it. The product of billions of years of evolution, that whole thing. But it really is the conversation that you inevitably have when you're relaxed, when you're not trying to prove something, when you're not trying to get somewhere, when you're just hanging out. And so it's cool to know that there's that many people having this conversation. Like, it doesn't have to be super fucking deep necessarily. It's just about connecting with the people that you're with. It doesn't have to be the super high-minded cerebral stuff. It's just, asking someone how they're doing, and then connecting with them, resonating with them, relating to them through their experience. And that's going to lead to some degree of this conversation. So yeah, it's incredibly exciting to see that, especially knowing that it's like, because we haven't known how big our audience is. And it's hard to track because we send everyone back to season 1, episode 1. Like, that's where everyone's going. No, podcasts don't do that. They're just like, they have a guest and they're like, this week's episode. So people are like up to date, and new listeners just jump in to like recent episodes. We don't do that. So it's a much different structure. So it's very much more a long play, but to know that there's 10 throughout the world just kind of like going through some point in the podcast, making their way through, is fucking incredibly exciting.
Yeah, crazy. And even the fact that half of those are in the United States. Wow. Hey, hi, everyone in the United States. I'm coming to Colorado shortly. I'm very excited about that. There's some details about that on our Patreon and whatnot, though there's also some details on our website. Though the tickets are sold out, but we're going to be going to karaoke on June 14th. That's a Wednesday night in Denver. So we will release the details as to where that's going to be as we get closer to it. But do do keep up with what we're doing. If you're interested in coming to karaoke with Andrew and I on Wednesday, June 14th, somewhere in Denver, Colorado. That said, there's a retreat coming up as well, a mini retreat in Vermont on August 24th to August 28th. Tier 1 early access is now available on our Patreon page, patreon.com/dualistic-unity. It's $5 a month. You can save $50 on your ticket price, or if you'd like to upgrade to tier 2 or tier 3, you can save $150 off your ticket, or even $350 off your ticket. It is definitely worthwhile to be a tier 3 patron if you can. You get some sick merch, and you get a shout out in the credit roll of every one of our video episodes.
Yeah, Patreon's a fucking gold mine, to say the least. So even just checking it out is worthwhile. Reading through what's there, and hopping on, testing it out for a month, see how you like it. Because yeah, if you're enjoying listening to the conversation, having the conversation is like 100 times better. So definitely hop on there.
It's the difference between porn and sex.
Boom. Oh man. All right. That's going on a t-shirt or something. Oh, that's a solid comparison right there.
I thought so. I wanted to go back to the conversation that we were having prior to recording here, which was in listening to the difference in Andrew since our first conversation, which was just prior to episode 1 of the podcast. We had one recorded conversation and another conversation in between that, and I think one before that. So we had some short conversations and one good interview. And Andrew was listening to that interview before the podcast. You can just listen to Scratching the Surface. You can hear the same thing. There is such a difference in where Andrew sounds like he's coming from. And what I mean is that it's almost like we're trying to figure out what it is we're trying to do. And so there's this accumulation of conceptual knowledge. This is when you go looking for quotes, and you go looking for authors, and you go looking for books, and you go looking for stuff that you can reference and say that, now I know that now. I've read that. I understand that. And then all of a sudden, all of that starts to fade, and you're just like, what? Oh, it's what? So it's just me. And it just starts settling in. And then all of a sudden, as it settles in, your tone changes. You don't sound so lost. You don't sound so tentative. Like, you're not so concerned about not taking in the right information or finding the right information. Like, all of that disappears, and you're just grounded. You just sound grounded, and you sound at ease. And so I think that would be the biggest difference between early in the podcast and now, is that you just sound more at ease, man. Like, you just sound more yourself. There's less hesitation to be what you are. I think that's the only difference. It's not that you've learned anything, because you haven't. If you think about it, if anything, I've made it more difficult for you to exist in the world by making everything questionable. So it's not like you're learning new concepts. If anything, you're just learning to have faith in yourself. And that's because you're willing to question those concepts, which is why you sound so at ease.
Yeah, it really is just what we have in the way. Like, it's just what's in the way. Like, there are so many layers to what we think we are, what we think we should be, what we think we should become. And so it isn't about being more or adding to yourself or anything. Like, we get so caught because of the way that we're brought up, because of the school system, because of so many things. We think that we have to add to ourselves, and that's not it at all. Like, we can get so caught in that. And I just had a visitor in here. I guess I'm staying with a family friend, and they did mention they have like a bug spray guy coming in, and he just walked in and sprayed down stuff. And yeah, I think he had headphones in, but whatever.
Should you be getting out of there possibly?
Yeah, right. All of a sudden, I just like keel over. Oh God. But anyway, so the point I was getting across. Hey, Kuch, I appreciate it. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you in a bit. Getting all sorts of visitors here today. That was my family friend. I told him I'd grab the coffee. He said he was getting me coffee. I think
you're going to need to give everyone an update on where you are, because at last we heard you were on the road. So where are you now, Andrew? And what's happening in your life? Because you've been on an adventure.
I have. Yeah, we'll get back to what I was saying because I do think it's an important point to try and get across. But I am currently in Scottsdale, Arizona. So I was in San Diego for the last 2 weeks. Drove here. It's about 6 hours yesterday, and I'm here. Some family friends, known them for a very long time. My dad and him worked together for a while, and so they have a house in Scottsdale. So I was able to reach out to them just because I'm making my way to Houston's my ultimate destination, and it's like a, I don't know, 25-hour drive from San Diego. And so I was a couple of weeks ago, I was like, all right, how the fuck am I going to split this up? So it works out. And then tomorrow I'm going to make my way to somewhere in Texas, somewhere in West Texas, try and get like 10 hours of driving in. Probably going to leave at like 2 or 3 a.m. To get there in time for everything and not be stressed. But I don't really mind. I don't mind driving. And, we got our good friend Caffeine to keep me going on it. Yeah. And then this weekend, I'm actually going to Austin to see our friend, former guest, Mike, Quinn 92 in concert on Saturday with two of my good friends. So yeah. And then after Texas, up to Denver for the retreats. So yeah, that is my little update. So I'm here till tomorrow morning. But yeah, Scottsdale is very nice. I went on a walk this morning, and it's like that dry sort of heat, but it was 80, and it not like, without the humidity, you're not sweating. It's just like very, very pleasant. So yeah, it's been good. But anyway, that's my update. So I'll head back into the shift, which is not a one-time thing, but I think for a while early on, and this is just me speaking from experience, you think there's things you have to learn and add to yourself and gain and understand. It's like, I just want to get it. I want to understand it. And it's like we grow up building, we start carte blanche and we build all of these layers, what I am, what I think I am, what I think the world is, what I think other people are. And like, none of those are the truth of what they are. And so it's just really more deeply recognizing that they're not the truth. Like, none of the things you thought were true were true. And so over time, you're really just coming back to being yourself. Like, those layers start coming off. And I think that's been my progression in the last year and a half, 2 years, is since recognizing I'm not what I think I am. There's still a lot that you don't even recognize that you think you are, you think you have to be, or there's this fucking imaginary bar that you have to live up to. And so you're always kind of concerned about where you're fitting in and measuring that. And then, the more you recognize that none of that is what you thought it was, like, none of that is the truth. It's just, you come back to yourself through not adding anything. It's just taking things away. It's just recognizing that isn't it. That isn't it. That isn't it. That isn't it. What's left is what's it, which you can't say, like, you can't point to. It's just what's left. And so without so many of those, suits of armor, so many layers, so many things that I think I need to be or should be or whatever, just what's left is what you are. And you don't have to be anything else. And so that's been the shift. I haven't, like, as much as this conversation's been incredible and I really enjoy it, it's been me in my own life questioning everything I think I am and continuing, like, being very, very relentless with it. And like, I haven't, and that's why, people ask, like, oh, what's your, that's one of the funniest questions, like, what's your background? But even besides that, it's like, oh, what books got you there? What, understandings? And you actually mentioned this in one of the old episodes I listened to yesterday, I think, with the other guest, that no, fucking, now it's like gone as soon as I took that deviation. It's not about coming to fuck, it's like totally gone. What was the last part I was saying?
That's a really good question. I deviated as soon as you started bringing up a guest. I'm like, shit, which guest?
It was it's like there's nothing there anymore. So anyway, it's not about gaining anything or adding knowledge or, reading books necessarily. It's just, there's so much in the way of what we think we are. And so you can't even gain it. Oh, it was people asking, what's your background? What got you to these realizations? And you said something along the lines of like, it's really obvious. Like, this is very basic stuff. People will tell you, like, sounds like you're just saying stuff that's pretty obvious, right? It's pretty straightforward. It's like, yeah, exactly. That's it. It's not this like, you got to understand all these texts and like define the ego based on, Nietzsche or whatever. It's like, no, it's what's right in front of us all the time. And without so many conceptual ideas of what being here now means or what you think you are, it's just what's right in front of us all the time. That's it. It's not like, you don't need a fucking book. You don't need a fucking teacher. You don't need a fucking guru. It's just sitting with yourself, being willing to question everything you think to be true, everything you believe to be the truth. That's it. That's like the quote unquote process. You can call it that even. It's just coming back to yourself because we've gotten so lost in thinking something has to be the truth. Some conceptual idea has to be the truth. No, it isn't. Those are conceptual ideas. They're not the truth. They're fragments. Your perception of reality is not reality. It's a fragment of it at best. What's left is what is. And so, yeah, it is fucking obvious. We've just gotten so lost in thinking that it's got to be something, got to gain this knowledge. And we think that like knowledge and intelligence is something that we gain instead of something that we are. So when you stop trying to gain it, you recognize that you've always been it. And there's nothing to add to that. It's just what is. Anytime you try and add something to it, it's distorting it. So but yeah, it's not adding. It's really not adding anything. It's not understanding more. If anything, it's understanding less. Being okay with that.
Yeah, taking away the layers of false certainty. That's really all it is. And so, see, I love this because this is the single hardest thing to communicate. That it's not what you think it is. That's why it's one of my favorite things to hear people say, and we hear it a lot. But that's not what I thought it was. This isn't what I think it is, as people have an insight as opposed to trying to memorize a concept, because that's the reality. It's not what you think it is. It can't be, right? Because what you're thinking is part of the prison. And isn't that fun? That's exactly what Krishnamurti was saying. Like, you're trying to know the unknown. But as soon as you think about it, that's based on everything that you know, because it's based on thought. So you can't experience the unknown through the known. You have to let go of the known, which is your thought, all that false certainty, right? He says the known, but I think that's kind of tongue in cheek, honestly. I think that's more or less we feel like we know as opposed to actually knowing, right? But it really is just that. It's that recognition that it's not about pretending like you know. It's about recognizing that you can't, and that all you can do is gain more appreciation and more nuance and more context. And that is how awareness grows. That's how intelligence rises. That's how everything matures, is the continuous recognition of your relationship with your environment, of the considerations within the environment. But how often are we doing that? And how often do we have our head shoved in the sand because we're terrified of everything that's around us? And we're just telling ourselves a story that everything's going to be just fine. Don't worry, there's other giraffes that are going to take care of me while my head's stuffed in the sand.
Exactly. Like we've settled upon so many concepts as truth. Like so many things go unquestioned too. There's so many things that we don't even realize we're settling upon that have just become so habitual, like so deeply habitual. Like that's something too, that when you start recognizing, you're never what you think, there is a depth, there's like varying degrees of false certainty. And like we're settling upon the most shallow fucking false certainty, like that I'm what I think I am. I definitely know, oh, this situation I'm going through, it kind of sucks. And like, I know it's a bad thing. This is a bad thing. It shouldn't be happening. It definitely shouldn't be happening. It's like, well, maybe you'll learn something from it. Stop bitching and moaning for a second. Maybe there's something to be derived from it. Maybe there's something down the road that this is actually going to shift and change. And so that is like a super powerful insight to have. Like, you don't know what's best. You don't know there is no inherent good or bad, but that is, I would say, like a degree of it. And of course, I'm just using conceptual variations and whatnot. And so there is a depth just to that, because it is it also, like, recognizing that is recognizing it's not what you think. And so that has that can be as deep of a recognition as everything. This is just me being judgmental of the depth of, these things. But I think through that, you can recognize that. And then there's so much more to the false certainty that we've settled upon, but you can't dig into it until you start recognizing that. And people aren't willing to recognize that. Even they look at something, they're like, whoa, no, that was definitely bad. That why? Well, because it made me uncomfortable. Exactly. It's like, okay, there we are. There it is. But they're unwilling to even see that. And so there's so much, the story you tell yourself. Maybe that's, say, hypothetically, a layer deeper. It's like, if you can't even recognize the situation you're going through, you don't know where it's going to lead, where it's going to go, whether it's good or bad. Like, you've settled upon this whole story of you that's being maintained each and every day. Like, that is digging a little deeper. And then, and there's so many varying degrees of like questioning your idea of yourself and whatnot. And there's like variations within that. And there's the shit that you've held on to for a very long time, the stories we tell ourselves that just believe to be the truth. And we're like, no, yeah, that's who I am. Yep. That's what I am. And it's funny because, like, I'll have this conversation with people and then they'll say something, and like, it's hard sometimes for me to not say something. But I had a friend a little while ago. We were walking around, like, they wanted to get some new clothes or something. So we were walking and they were like, oh, I'm such a shopaholic. And I bit my tongue because we were having the conversation about identity and whatnot. And they were unwilling to kind of recognize that they're not what they think. Like, they're willing to go deep, but not that deep. And I just kind of bit my tongue and I was like, and didn't say anything. And then they asked me, like, what are you thinking? I was like, do you want me to say? And they're like, yeah. I was like, I mean, honestly, when you said you were a shopaholic, I was like, careful. That's another story you're telling yourself, reinforcing your idea of yourself that's cutting you off from recognizing that you're everything. And they're like, oh, fuck. And I was like, I wasn't going to say it. You asked me. So it's funny, though, because even those, like, as much as that, it's like, because I don't do that. I'm not like, oh, careful. I'm not that guy who's like, stop telling yourself a story, because it's like, they're going to do what they're going to do. But things like that are important to question. Settling upon that reinforces everything you think you are. Like, even just shopping and being like, oh, I'm getting all this stuff. I'm such a shopaholic. It's like, no, you're fucking not. No, you're not. That's not a thing. It's not actually a thing. That's just a story you keep telling yourself that's like giving you an excuse to keep buying shit you don't need. Like, that's kind of what it comes down to. But it's another story that you're adding to the conceptual idea of you. And even just a little story like that is everything. Like, if you're willing to tell yourself that story, how many other stories are you telling yourself? Like, that's staying on the ball, is when you say something like that, being like, yeah, but that's not actually what I am. But people like fully, wholeheartedly believe that. It's like, you're not that. And being willing to question that can be uncomfortable at first. And that's why people don't do it, because they want to know themselves and they want a fucking excuse for their actions as well, which I've never really thought of, like, how much of an excuse the stories we tell ourselves are like validating the actions that we take that maybe aren't the most beneficial towards us. So yeah, it's like, fucking be careful of that shit too. Like, it's all reinforcing that story and cutting us off. So you got to be willing to question even the things you're like, oh, that's just a little, I'm just making a joke, whatever. It's like, I get it, but like, careful.
Yeah, because that shit's scaffolded. You don't realize it, like, at all. At first, you think, like, oh, I'm just a shopaholic. Like, that. The only problem here is that you're justifying basically what you're doing as a distraction from something else. And so there's some benefit to what you're doing, which is what led you to it. But what is that benefit? What led you to it? Because you weren't always a shopaholic. At one point, it just became something that you liked doing because it was better than dealing with something else. And so it became more and more gratifying in contrast to the things that you were trying to avoid. What were those things? Then you start looking at those layers. And that's the reason that we don't want to question the whole shopaholic thing, is because frankly, if we do, then we're going to have to start peeling away the layers that got us to being a shopaholic, and that's still unresolved too. And those are probably based on something else that's unresolved. And so once we start peeling away certain layers, we start peeling away other layers. And so rather we just be like, it's just a joke, and let it go. And again, within reason, you can definitely make a joke, but there is very much a little bit of poison with a comment like that, whether you realize it or not. With it, you are putting yourself in a box and you are justifying your actions. And there's, again, if you're aware of it, that's one thing. But if you're not, if you're doing it out of a knee-jerk response because you don't want to deal with the fact that you're buying something that you probably don't need or don't truly want and isn't really going to make your life better, but you're just like, oh, I'm a shopaholic, to justify doing so, that's a problem for you at the end of the day. Like, that's all it is. And you can deal with it or not. And you don't have to, but the question is, how long do you think you can carry that on before you address where that escapism is coming from? And that's really all that happens after enough time. Because, it's interesting. You can put certain things off and not really think about it for years, but what you start to recognize, you start putting off other things that are related to that thing. And then before you know it, there's a whole bunch of shit that you've just put off and don't want to deal with. Right. And then even just the idea of facing even a single thing, it's like the onslaught is behind it. And you're like, no, I don't want to question that. And that's the problem. That's why you have to weed the garden, because otherwise it seems overwhelming. Otherwise, those weeds grow thorns. They become really, really intimidating, right? And it's only because you haven't been tending to them. They're getting overgrown. And that's all it is. It only seems daunting at first until you start trimming them back, and then you realize, oh, right, I can trim these back. But at first, it's just like, did you ever mow lawns as a kid for money or anything like that? I don't know if I'm aging myself again.
Oh, yeah, I've a little bit, mostly just for my family, but yeah.
Okay, so I used to go around in my neighborhood with lawnmower and go from yard to yard, and occasionally you get a neighbor who just doesn't mow their lawn. I get all, and what's worse is I had one of those push mowers. You ever try those? Right? They're rough. They are rough. And so here I am trying to push mow this lawn where the grass is like over a foot tall. And it was just brutal. And that's why, it's because it was untended, right? So there was a bunch of steps that you had to do first. You had to find a way to trim it down before you could mow it, right? You had to find a way to shorten it. And so that's what I mean, is that it seems overwhelming only because it's gone on untended for so long. That's all it is, but once you start getting to it, which is uncomfortable, that's the thing. Like, what I mean by getting to it, because I can hear somebody asking, what does that mean? It means not running. It means not running from the discomfort. When all of a sudden you have the urge to find an escape that gives you a short-term high, don't. See what comes up. And that's what you're going to go through. That's what you're going through. You see, I can't tell you what it is you're going to go through at all. I can tell you it will be uncomfortable until you do. And the process of that, of accepting it, of letting it go, and dealing with the reason that it's uncomfortable, right, is learning, is intelligence, is growth, maturity, all of that. It's just that we all want to know, like, well, how? What do I think about? Which steps do I go through? It's like, that's not it. It's one step. It's always through the fire, always. Right. But then out the other side, all your shit's been burned away. Right. And you remain. And it just seems so terrifying until we do it.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's not a guidebook. There's not like a rule book, because that involves you following the rule book. And then you're the one following the rules, following the guidelines, following the things. And that's not it. It's like, it's you doing it in and of yourself. There's not like this, like, we can't give you a pamphlet and just be like, this is it right here. Just follow this and you'll be good. it's because it's just each and every moment, every time you think you can know yourself or you think something is true, just recognizing that it's not, and like being willing to sit in that discomfort. But it's interesting how it kind of peeks through so often, and there's so much there, like identity, almost like a ball with a shell, and there's little things that'll crack through, like little I guess kind of like weeds growing through the sidewalk a little bit is how I'm picturing it. But there's little things like the shopaholic comment, or angry person comment, or I'm a sad person, or whatever. It's just little bits kind of poking through. You're like, oh, that's not a big deal, because that's all you're seeing. But underneath the surface, there's a fucking monster down there. And all you're seeing is the little weed growing through the crack. And you're like, oh, that's fine. And you're unwilling to look at that because you're like, yeah, but if I'm not that, then, and I think I'm something else, like, what if I'm not that either? Like, exactly. Keep going down that. It's not going to be super comfortable necessarily, but that's it. It's like everything that you think you are isn't what you are. And so being willing to settle upon that, and then what's left is the reality of you. Like, you can finally look up, like we were talking on Patreon yesterday with Amanda. The example she brought up, I forget exactly, but the way I took it was, we're all looking down at our hands at a grain of sand, being like our idea of ourself, not recognizing that we don't have to pay it so much attention. We can look up and actually start experiencing reality for what it is. Everyone's got their head down looking at it. And I guess, like, yeah, exactly. It's like trying to figure it out. Like, all right, how does this fit? What does yours look like? How does mine look? And it's like this little thing that doesn't even, it's like, it's almost like it's not even there. Like, we think something's there. And so we're trying to like define it, see how it measures up. And it's like, there's actually nothing there. You can look up and start experiencing yourself as reality, because there is a way to live life beyond settling upon a conceptual idea of yourself. Like, what's left is actually being in reality. Like, we settle upon these ideas and we think that we can know ourselves, and that cuts us off from the experience of just being in reality. When people ask, like, well, okay, if I'm none of those things, then what am I? It's like, you're here now. You're here now. Look around. There's a lot to see. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to explore, and you don't need to maintain and measure your progress as you explore it. How well am I exploring this? Oh, have I covered everything yet? How much has everyone else explored things? Like, how valuable am I at this point? It's like, you're always the highest value you can have. You can't gain it by exploring more. You can't lose it by exploring less. So just being willing to look around and walk around and have that experience. Like, the experience is very full when you look up from that grain of sand, when you recognize that you can't actually know yourself. And what's left is just being here now in it without so much concern. Like, how many things do we not go into because we're concerned about how we're going to measure up, or if we'll measure up, or if we'll fail, or hoping to succeed? That's just like staring at the grain of sand, being like, can I handle this? How have I done in the past? How is that gonna definitely happen in the future? Because I definitely know how this is gonna happen. I definitely know what it's gonna mean about me. And it's like, you never do. Even going through it, sitting in the discomfort, even going through it and maybe feeling like you didn't do super well. You still don't even know that. Quote unquote, doing well is completely subjective. That doesn't exist. Doing well isn't a thing that exists in reality. It's a subjective opinion based on a relative perception of yourself versus everyone else. Like, it's not actually.
What if I have 18 super sports cars? What about that?
Then you got a lot of value. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure.
Not 17 though. 17 doesn't cut it. You need 18. But it's yeah, fucking A. It's so funny how we think that our assumption of our value actually dictates our value. Like, we think our assumption of how we're doing in life is the reality of how we're doing. And it like, we're always just settling upon assumptions all the time. You can never actually know how you're doing. You can never actually know how you measure up. You can't, like, you can't know it. You can try, you can settle upon an assumption. You can't know. Like, we're always trying, like, we're always measuring it, thinking we can know, thinking it's even possible. You can't. You can't know how you're doing. You're just doing. And everything else is an assumption because you're uncomfortable in not knowing what you are and how you're doing.
So here's a fun way to play that game. See, what I'll do is I'll look at myself in a hyper positive way, and then I'll convince everybody else that they need to be like me. And so as they're trying to be like me, I get to feel awesome because they're trying to be like me, because I'm saying this is what's gonna make them valuable, right? This is that whole Andrew Tate thing. I'm glad we're getting into this because somebody was asking in the comments section, what is your opinion on Andrew Tate? We did talk about this in season 3, episode 9. It's an episode called Fundamental Selfishness. We discussed Andrew Tate a little bit in there, and I think in a few other episodes here and there. You'll find it. We brought it up. The point is that it's just really quite sad, because it's this idea that this is what makes me valuable. If I'm not like this, I don't have value. If I'm not, doing what I do, if I'm not out there having the image that I have, if I don't, buy the things that I buy, if I don't make the money that I make, blah, 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 then I have no value. And if you're not doing it, you have no value. And that's why you're not happy, is because you don't have all the things that I have. And it's really just, it's so sad. And it's only because there's a need. There's a need for those things. There's a need for those things. And he'll say, like, oh, I didn't have these things. And he didn't. He was poor. He grew up, to training as a fighter. It's not like he was, basking in riches for a good portion of his life. But he looks at those periods as him having less value. So you can see the need. All of a sudden now he has value. Now, he's what a man is supposed to be, so on and so forth. And that's why he has his position on how a man is supposed to act in a relationship, what a relationship is supposed to be, what a woman is supposed to be in a relationship. Well, why is that? Because if there wasn't anything but these clearly defined rules that he has to live within and everybody else has to live within, life would be uncertain. And that's terrifying. So, I mean, you can go on and on about how you can kick someone's ass. You can go on and on about how good of a fighter you are. And he is. No argument there. But you can't fight life. Like, you're going to lose that one every fucking time. Every time. You can't beat it. And that's the point. What are you running from? And this is why I find Andrew Tate's reaction to psychedelics to be so goddamn funny. Not just the fact that, well, I drink. It's not like I'm seeing spirits. It's like, it's a totally different experience, for one. Secondly, oh, and if you think that it's going to wake you up to the universe or anything like that, I'm going to find you, kick your ass or something like that. Like, he got totally violent all of a sudden. It's just like, whoa, like, take a break, take your knuckles off the ground, stop with the chest pounding. It's going to be all right. There are whole worlds out there that you are just not familiar with. There are whole perceptions of the universe and yourself that you've never even looked at. It doesn't have to be terrifying. It's just that when you are so invested in the way that you see things, when you're so invested in the way you see yourself, and you're so invested in getting everyone else to have the same perception of you, the idea that maybe your perception isn't the truth is super threatening, right? And that's a real warrior. Somebody who's willing to be in the uncertainty of life, paying attention without needing to brag and put themselves up on a pedestal just because they're insecure.
Yeah, I was right before you brought it up. I was thinking about his stance on psychedelics and just how funny it is in his response. Like, oh yeah, take some mushrooms and fight me. It's like, what, bro? What is that? Your only answer? It's like, I could kick your ass. It's like, does that make you better than me? Like, I'm not really following what you're trying to get across here. I don't know if you're understanding what this is all about. It's just such a sort of primal stance on life, and like the way to live is, well, I'm better if I can beat you up. Like, dude, come on. But so this is, I was kind of thinking of this as you were talking. It's directly along the lines of what you're talking about. I haven't really thought of it before, so I don't know how it'll I'm still definitely fleshing it out, but it's interesting. Like anyone who maintains an idea, an Andrew Tate type, they have all the cars, all the houses, all the money. It's like they need to point to something or maintain something or explain something in order to express their value. Like they need that. It's like, so you're telling me without those things, you don't have value anymore, or you have less value? Because that seems like a really, really unstable way to exist, to live in reality. And it's not even like the materialistic stuff, not even the sports cars, not even the houses. It's maintaining an assumption of your value, maintaining an idea of how you compare to other people as if that's actually the truth. Like that's still just an assumption. Like you can't actually point to your value and say, that's it. That's where my value is derived. And if you do, it's like, that's a really unstable way to live and exist. Like needing to maintain, that sounds really fucking stressful. It sounds really tough, honestly. And it's, again, it's not even the materialistic stuff. It's the conceptual ideas. Like, I have value because I've done this, because I achieved this, because I'm this type of person. And you need some sort of explanation or a reason for it. And it's just like, I'm like, I don't understand how people can see that as being above your value being inherent to what you are. Like, yeah, I don't need anything to recognize my value. I don't need to point to anything to show you my value. I'm reality. I'm not what I think. I'm just like, there's so much more to the recognition that you're not what you think. Like the fullness of that recognition. How could you point to something and be like, that adds value? It's like, that's fucking laughable. That is hilarious that you think that could add to the reality of what you are. That you think any conceptual idea, anything that you maintain inside of your mind, any other person's opinion of how they see you could shift, raise, lower, change your value whatsoever. Like, it's fascinating that in our society is how we do it, though. And it's just ourselves maintaining that assumption. It's just me saying, okay, I wasn't valuable before because I maintained this conceptual idea of where my value is derived from. But now I have this, so now I'm more valuable. It's like your value didn't shift at all. You just have more shit now. You actually have more stuff weighing you down, kind of. You have more things to defend, more things to maintain. And so maybe you can think you have more value, but that's the cost then, is the maintenance of that thing. It's the maintenance, the defense of the thing. Now you have these stances. And this is my opinion on this. This is where my value is derived from. Someone questions it, you got to defend that shit, or else, God forbid, your value is going to drop. Value is going to be diminished. So I just find it, I don't know. I haven't really thought of it like that before, how many people point to something and be like, that's where my value is derived from. Even just the conceptual idea of themselves, thinking that can add to the reality of what they are, as opposed to just recognizing they're not what they think, and therefore their value is immeasurable. Like, they're like, to have to maintain a story sounds exhausting, really difficult, and just a sad comparison to recognizing the reality of what you are and the unwavering value that comes with that.
Yeah. Well, and it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that if you have something that a bunch of other people want, then you must have more value because you have the thing that everybody else wants. But the problem is everybody else wants it, thinking it's going to make them better, thinking it's going to add value to their life. And so you finally get this thing. And after the short-lived temporary high of getting that thing, you start to recognize that you're still you. Well, are you going to go and tell all those people who are still striving to get that thing that it's not everything that it was cracked up to be? Are you going to go and tell them like, it was a waste of time? Probably not, right? You're probably not going to do that, because now you have some temporary high, at least, of having that thing where they don't. That's why I enjoyed where Jim Carrey came out and said, I hope everybody gets what they want, to realize it doesn't do shit. It doesn't help at all, right? But that's it. How often do people who get all of these things that they want come out and go, yeah, I'm still a miserable prick? You know, like Jeff Bezos, I don't think there's any debate whatsoever that he's a miserable prick, like at all, right? And he's got a lot of money. Well, at that point, we should be looking at the fact that, you know, this is one of the richest men in the world, and he's a miserable prick. But we don't look at that. We're just like, but he can buy anything he wants, and he's a miserable prick, right? And like, that's the whole one. Think about that. Just carry that through. Okay? You can have that much money, do anything you want, get anything you want, fucking pay for anything you want, and you're still fucking miserable? Seriously? Like, how do we not notice this? We don't notice because we don't want to. What we want is a quick, easy solution to our suffering, which has got to be dollar bills, right? It's got to be money. Control, right? If I have enough control, I'm not going to be unhappy. Unfortunately, happiness and comfort don't go hand in hand, right? Happiness and a lack of risk don't go hand in hand, right? If you want to feel alive, that's kind of taking on the risk of living. So you got to ask what your priorities are and why those are your priorities. That's really it. We had a good question here. I'm going to move on for a brief second off of egotistical people. Do you guys think that when sometimes we question everything all the time, that it kind of takes away from the responsibility for the actions? Like, for example, if I do something stupid, judgment, I stop to not give it any idea, like bad or good, and then think, was it stupid or was it not? No, it wasn't. That's just an idea. But it feels like avoiding the impact of our action, like a comfort thing. Curious what you all think. Okay, so this is great. There is this common sentiment in our society. I don't know if it's a Catholic thing, but it's been around for a long time. It's very much an egotistical thing, where we seem to believe that unless we feel like a bag of shit, we're not learning. That somehow, if we're not beating ourselves up and flogging the inner child, that we are not taking shit into our head. You don't have to feel guilty and shameful and regretful to feel like you're learning something. You really don't. It's just that you've always done that. You know, it's kind of like when somebody passes on, and this is something that often happens with clients, is years will go by and they will continue to go into the memories that makes it hurt, that makes them suffer about this person passing on, under the impression that if it was to stop hurting, it would be indicative that they have stopped caring. And that's not the case, right? Just because you don't feel like a dumbass doesn't mean you didn't learn. If anything, it made it easier for you to learn because you're not putting yourself in the way of the lesson. You're not judging yourself and wasting all that fucking time and energy on thinking about yourself in a judgmental way. You're just taking it in. You're taking accountability. Now, that said, I understand what you're saying, and you can easily just go, well, it's not good or bad, so therefore it doesn't matter if I hurt that person's feelings. I've heard this shit. I had somebody tell me straight in the face, oh, it was great. You know, I just came into town, ran into somebody, and they were nice enough to let me stay at their apartment overnight. And while I was there, they were telling me, oh, yeah, I got like an ounce of weed in my freezer. You know, we'll smoke some and then we'll chill out. And as I was sleeping on their couch, I decided I got to prove that I'm not afraid. And so to prove that I'm not afraid, I stole their weed. Like, and I shit you not, like I've heard exactly this shit. And it wasn't a bad thing because, you know, there is no ownership and we're all one. And I've heard this shit. Okay. And you can do that until that motherfucker finds you. And here's the thing, like, how long can you hurt people? How long can you justify it as not being bad or good and ignore the ripple that happens? Because there is one. There is one. It may not be bad or good. Explain that when somebody comes over and they're pissed at you because you're not paying attention to the ripple that you're creating. Now you have a ripple to deal with. Where did that come from? You. It came from you. So it's one thing to recognize there's no bad or good, that you're not a dumbass, that none of it defines you. It's another thing to ignore the ripples that you're creating. You don't have to look at them as bad or good to recognize that they're there. So they kind of go hand in hand.
Oh, yeah. It's fucking hilarious. But it really is. You're either judging yourself or you're learning from it. It's very difficult to do both at the same time. You're either reinforcing that you're the bag of shit that did the thing, or you're learning to let go of that story and that idea that you're telling yourself. Like it's it's tough to do both. And shame and guilt are not the answer. They reinforce the story. They get you to do it again and again and again and again, because now you feel like more of a bag of shit. So now you want to stop feeling like a bag of shit. So you're going to do something dumb to avoid, escape the bag of shit feeling, as opposed to just sitting in it and recognizing it. It's almost like a cop out to tell yourself that. And it's like, oh, I felt bad, so now I deserve to punish myself. It's like, that's almost more satisfying in like a, what's the word, like masochistic way, to shame yourself and kind of beat yourself up psychologically, as opposed to just dropping it and being like, yeah, I wasn't super clear there. I was being pretty egotistical, being pretty selfish, but it's all in there, but it's not my only option. I can see other options. I can, and maybe there's some repercussions that you got to deal with. Maybe you go and talk to the person and say, hey, I was being a bag of shit, whatever. But instead, people would rather just beat themselves up and not do that, not take the responsibility. And with God damn, that story is so wild. But like how lost in concepts we can get. Like, oh, there's no good or bad, so I'm just going to do anything. It's like, there are repercussions to your actions, motherfucker. Like, there are still consequences. Yeah, sure, you don't have to judge it necessarily as good or bad, but how sensitive are you being to reality? How self-involved are you being? That's going to dictate, the response to the actions that you take. And it's hilarious that people are like, and then maybe the person comes over and they're like, well, there's no good or bad, so I just didn't. It's like, fucker, you stole something from me. Like, what?
From someone who gave you a place to stay.
Exact. And offered to smoke you out. Like, and like, where does that even come from? But I get it. Like, we can get so caught in like needing to prove ourselves that we get something or understand something. And we're like, I'm going to prove that I know this. It's like, oh, Jesus Christ, you don't have to do that. There's nothing to become. Even someone who understands that there's no good or bad, and they have to prove that in some fucking like backwards ass contorted way. But something else you said before, like comfort doesn't equal happiness. I don't think a lot of people recognize that. I don't think I've ever heard that be said in that way. Like, that kind of hit me different. Like, obviously we talk about it a lot, and like discomfort versus comfort, being willing to sit in the discomfort and whatnot. But we have this view that we get to a degree of comfort and satisfaction and just being able to kind of like, I always think of Idiocracy, people like sitting on the toilet in their recliner with their big jug of soda, just a TV in front of them, and they just don't have to move at all. They can just eat and shit and watch TV and eat and shit and watch TV. And that's the extreme of comfort. Do they look happy? No, absolutely not. Like, we we get so caught in thinking that we should only be experiencing one side of the spectrum. We get so caught in thinking that that's it. Oh, if I can just not be feeling so shitty all the time. It's like, look at the shittiness. Stop trying to escape it. Stop trying to avoid it. Like, it's uncomfortable. I get it, but it's not about being comfortable all the time. That does not lead to happiness. Happiness is an experience that arises in certain situations, but it's not something to strive for. It's not something to try and keep, because it's not it. And like, we think that if we can just get to a place of comfort, we'll be happy forever. If we're just comfortable enough, like, how long does that last? Have you ever, spent a day like sitting on the couch and just watching TV for a while, just kind of going through Netflix, whatever? It's like, that is comfortable. You got food in front of you, and it's great. Like, I do that all the time for a bit, for a little while. You do that you're telling me you want to do that for 9 hours? Like, you do that for 9 hours, that's going to become its own sort of hell, its own sort of prison that you're going to want to get out of. You're going to want to go do something, go on a run. That's not considered comfortable, but it's the dichotomy and in the variability in our experience that makes it so beautiful. Like, if we only had one side, if we could only do things that made us comfortable all the time, like, what the fuck would we be doing? Like, we would try and find things that are uncomfortable. We would start craving discomfort, but there's so much to it because we're so self-involved and so concerned about how we're being perceived. And now we have this whole narrative that being rich and famous is like the peak. And, oh, if I can just have enough money that I don't have to, worry about anything ever. I can get everything that I want. I can have all the control. I can, get this. I can be happy. I can get this person to like me. And like, none of those things come with that either. Like getting all the money, getting all the fame doesn't come with like, a sticker like this guarantees happiness. It's just another experience. There is a vast spectrum of that experience of having a bunch of money and rich and fame. And I know people who I've, friends of mine who have, family money and they like one in particular, like their family owns a sports team. And so you always wonder, you kind of get pampered your whole life. Like, does this person like me for me, or do they like me for what they can get out of me? And there's not, like with everything, there's not really a way to guarantee one way or the other. So you're kind of sitting in that degree of uncertainty. And it's like, yeah, maybe it's more comfortable uncertainty, but it's still uncertainty. There's still variations in that. And so it's not like there is no point that you can get to where it's like, that's it, I'm good. It's always a back and forth, up and down, in and out, the experience. But we so badly crave that one spot where we're just like good forever. And it's not that. It's going through it. It's just, if anything, not being afraid of going through it. That's the shift, if anything, is the false idea that you can go through it without, you don't have to go through it. That false idea that you don't have to go through it and you can get to a spot where there is just everything's beautiful and amazing and super fucking comfortable all the time. The shift is recognizing that doesn't exist. And if anything, it's just about experiencing the entire spectrum without so much fear, without so much weight, without so much concern for what it means about you. And then you step into anything. It's like, all right, yeah, this might not be super comfortable, but yeah, I'll be fine. What's the worst that happens? I get made fun of. Maybe I die. I'm eternal anyway. So there isn't the concern anymore. And that's the shift, I think, is just the lack of fear of experiencing even fear. Like even that, not being afraid of that. And that's going to fluctuate too. But the experience is not about getting to a point. I think we forget that pretty often. Like it's about going through it all the time. Without one end of the spectrum, the other end of the spectrum would not be nearly as appreciated.
I mean, it's the basis of a lot of our culture too, right? Like we want to find a path, and then the majority of us just have to do that path. That's all. We just want to follow a path, and that's what's going to lead to certainty and security. And that's why we have the schooling system. I'm bringing up this specifically to address the next comment, of course, which was, you guys have talked about the shitty schooling system. What about the stigma of dropping out? So it's important to remember that not going to school doesn't mean that you can't learn. In fact, you can learn a lot. There's fucking a world of information around you. You can learn all day, every day, and never have to worry about a curriculum at all, and just fucking eat away at all the possible knowledge. You can just enrich yourself with so much information. So that has nothing to do with intelligence or knowledge or even ability. The problem is that our culture doesn't necessarily recognize that because it's difficult and there's a lot of uncertainty. And so we think to ourselves, well, if we want our children to be intelligent, we have to stick them in a school where there are obviously tools that will make them intelligent. Look, there's books on the wall. Books imply intelligence. Therefore, my kid is going into a place that's going to make them more intelligent. Look at all the letters on the wall. Look at all of this stuff that seems educational. So none of it actually implies any love of learning. None of it actually encourages any love of life at all. It's just drill that shit into their head. And everybody gets very, very reassured by the fact that there is an institution that is meant to drill shit into my kid's head so that they will be useful and survive in the world. None of which is true, which is why it continues to degrade year after year after year. What am I getting at? I'm getting at the fact that although schooling doesn't indicate intelligence, the majority of our society thinks so. Wants to think so, desperately wants to believe so. And so we have certain roadblocks as such. If you don't have a high school diploma, you can't get certain jobs. If you don't go to college, you can't get certain jobs. If you don't, get a master's, you can't get certain jobs. Like that's just the way things are. So does that mean you have to go that road? No. It doesn't. In fact, you can just not graduate high school, and then years down the road, if you decide, shit, I kind of need this certificate or something, you can go back to college and get your equivalency for high school in a way shorter period of time. And of course, not having to live in high school and deal with a bunch of stupid teenagers judging you and judging themselves and whatnot, you'll probably get your shit done a lot easier and faster if you need it. But it comes down to whether or not you need it. And in the world that we live in right now, not necessarily. There are infinite ways that you can make a success of yourself in terms of financial success. Let's just say financial stability, the ability to continue to pay your bills without starving to death. That's more or less what I mean by financial stability. I'm not talking about, buying any car you want or any house you want or anything like that. But let's just say you want to live in the world, and you want to live in the world with less stress. So some stability, so you can continue to work on yourself and have your space to grow and exist and self-reflect and all that stuff. You can do that just as well as you can do that getting a job after going through high school or college or university. It's going to be on you. So you don't have the luxury of that false structure, right? And the problem with that false structure, it doesn't pay off for everybody. I have met people with 2 and 3 degrees working at a fucking grocery store. So it really just comes down to the fact that the promise of the structure isn't always the result of the structure, but that's not why we do it. We do it for the promise, right? We do it for the promise because it's better than the uncertainty of having to be responsible for our lives. So I would say, fuck the stigma. The stigma will always exist according to the people who have to follow somebody else's structure out of fear. They're always going to judge anybody who doesn't, is what I'm saying. That doesn't mean that you're limited in any capacity, but it does mean you have to work a fuck ton harder, and it means it's so much more worth it.
Yeah, well said. It's funny how we just cling to that. If I just do this, everything will be good. If I just do this, everything will work out. If I just do this, and it allows us to lack responsibility and not pay attention to where we're at, and that's where things are understood. Like I think you said, like, knowledge doesn't equal intelligence. So I've written down comfort doesn't equal happiness and knowledge doesn't equal intelligence. And yet our society is basically run on the assumption that comfort does equal happiness and knowledge does equal intelligence. Intelligence is what you are. Some degree of happiness, not even happiness, just like at least peace or willingness to be where you're at, comes from just what you are when you're not settling upon certainties, when you're not trying to get somewhere, and it's not this like solidified experience. Like, peace doesn't equal happiness, or that state of just being free. It means experiencing everything, experiencing the whole spectrum. So yeah, I mean, I think you covered that pretty well. There was a question that came up right after that I wanted to get to, because we got like 10 minutes left. Hey guys, do you have any advice on how to stop the feeling of waiting for something to happen? I suppose how to just live in the moment. Oh, I lost it. Hold on. There it is. Instead of placing so much value on something when you don't even know if it's going to happen. So yeah, I mean, real quick, I think that's just it. You don't know what's going to happen. Like, being willing to sit in uncertainty is all that's left is here and now. Like, without so many conceptual ideas of what might happen, how your value is derived, what's even happening now, without so many names and labels and things that you settle upon, thinking that you could ever possibly know those, making so many assumptions, all that's left is the here and now. Like, I think this is something that's been hitting me more recently, was just how often it's discussed, like, oh, I got to be present. I got to actively be present, focus on the moment, be the moment, power of now, all that shit. And it's like, the present moment is what you are. It's inherent to what you are. It's like we were talking about earlier in the call, like in my sort of shift from season 1, episode 1 of Dualistic Unity to now, just come closer to what I actually am without so much in the way. It's like I had all these fucking layers, and now I have less layers, still plenty of layers, but just less. And so I'm freer in myself. The present moment's the same thing. Like, present moment is the reality of what you are. So it's just coming back to yourself without setting the need to settle upon so much certainty. Like, when you know that you can't be certain about anything, even what you are, what other people are, like that name, even the name and the story you think about with other people aren't the reality of what they are. The things, TV right here, That's just a word that points to this object that has, you can turn on and has pictures and pixels and all this shit. Like, it's just, it's funny. I was thinking about this too, just recognizing how much is uncertain all the time. Like, we forget like the process of coming to language almost. And I don't know if this is exactly how it went, but it's like back here, we call that window. The description of it would be hole in wall that light shines through. It's like, that's a lot of words. So we just say window, but that's describing its function. And now window is just a word that we have collectively agreed upon to do something of it. Now we think like window is the reality of what it is, as opposed to just a label that's shorter than having to describe it every single fucking time we say it, which is just a description of a thing that we can point to point out a difference between that and the rest of the wall over there. So that's all they are. So without being able to settle upon all the certainties, all the assumptions, thinking that they could ever possibly be true, sitting in that uncertainty, the rawness of just how uncertain everything is. Like, as you're speaking, you start judging your progress, you start judging how you're doing. You don't know how it's going. You don't know who's resonating with it. You don't know how people are understanding it. You don't know how clear or unclear you're being. You can settle upon this idea like, I don't think that was super clear. You don't fucking know. You don't fucking know. You don't. Yeah, but it was a little, you just don't know. But last time I did a little better. You don't know. Someone could have resonated way more with this one. You don't know. And yet we think we can. We think we can settle upon things and actually know anything. And that's what allows us to think that we can experience anything but the here and now. Thinking that we can be anything other than the here and now is the stories we tell ourselves, is the assumptions. Your idea of yourself is what gets maintained through the story rooted in the past and the concern for what's going to happen in the future and how your value may or may not go up or down. Without being able to settle upon any certainty about yourself, all that's left is the here and now. It's not this active process, the recognition of the rawness of uncertainty that you can't settle upon anything. It's just what's left. It's all there is. So it's not something you have to do. It's just be willing to question, be relentless in your willingness to not settle upon a story, upon an idea, upon a conceptual description because you're uncomfortable not knowing. You can't know. It's not even something you can do. Like you were saying with Krishnamurti before, like the known. It's tongue in cheek because you can't. It's just false certainty. There's no certainty, just false certainty. Like it doesn't exist. It's not a thing you can have, but we try to, and there's always a cost, like getting caught up in concerns about the past and the future. Like there isn't anything left when you recognize how rawly uncertain everything is.
Well said. Absolutely. You know, it's funny because I had problems with patience for a long time because there was always this impression like, okay, so I've just got to be good waiting. I've just got to be good waiting. And then it dawned on me, that's not patience. Waiting isn't patience at all, right? It's the exact opposite. And so it dawned on me one day that patience for me is just recognizing that I really got nothing better to do than this. Like this is where I am. This is exactly what I've worked for. This right here. And so there's no waiting. Things are just happening. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes your brain's not going to go, we have a meeting at 3. We have a meeting at 3. That meeting might do this, or it might go this way, or might go this way. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're waiting unless you dwell on those thoughts, but your brain's still trying to process context and information. Whereas if you wait for it, then all of a sudden you're going to get to that meeting. They're going to cancel on you last minute. You're going to be super frustrated because you were waiting for it, as opposed to going, and then moving on with your day and not worrying about it. So that really just comes down to, and as you said, being present, which oddly enough means being eternal. They go hand in hand. The more present you become, the more eternal you feel. And that's why you don't wait for anything, because you're just existence itself. What is there to wait for? More of you? That's pretty much it. We are running out of time. We have about 5 minutes left. Somebody was asking about our perspectives on death and the Stoicism's take on death. I would recommend, if you'd like, go and check out, was it Life and Death, season 2, episode 10. Is that correct?
Yeah, 9 or 10. 10. Yeah, 10. Yep.
It's called Life and Death. Go and check it out. Great episode. Everything about death and how we perceive life and what happens after we die and the nature of time. It's a good episode, is what I'm saying. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on it, of course. I just wanted to say, this has been fun. I love these shorter, raw episodes, man. We really pack a lot into them. We are going to continue in about 20 minutes. We're not done yet. Don't worry. You can join us for a group Zoom. We do this 5 days a week. Patreon.com/Dualistic Unity. It's only $5 a month, in which case you're helping us out as we build our podcast and build more resources and build more opportunities for the community to get together. So you're definitely helping there. And you get to chat with us face to face. And as I said earlier, there really is no substitute for the face-to-face discussion.
Porn versus sex. That's it. I like that comparison. Oh, it was good. But yeah, the life and death episode, I kind of want to re-listen to that. I've been enjoying, and at some point we're doing the commentary series. I know. So that'll be fun, especially now, because it's interesting me going back, because it's funny too, because obviously my tone and energy and even voice sounds a lot different, but like, we're not talking about anything different than what we're talking about now. Like, that's the thing, is there is, like, it's not that there's limitations to the conversation by any means. Like, if we've expressed anything through having over 200 episodes, like, there's a lot here, but there's like some fundamentals, and we kind of talked about it in season 5, episode 1. We discussed those things that you can keep circling around, because there's an infinite depth to each thing, and what we settle upon and the assumptions that we have, like the perception of division or the ego, or recognizing that this conversation isn't religion or a belief system or anything. Like, there's so much to those, but it's still kind of circling around the same sorts of recognitions. Like, you're not what you think. You're never what you think. Reality isn't what you think. Nothing is what you think. Other people aren't what you think. Like, and it's just continuing to go through that, because like our brain keeps thinking like, yeah, but this is what I think. This has to be what I think. This thing is what I think. Come on, something's what I think. And it's like, no, that's not it, because it's what's left. So it's been it's funny how there's been such a progression, but also whether you listen to season 1 or season 4 or 5, like, it's circling around the same conversation essentially. But yeah, just a lot more of me involved in it now, which is fun, because then there's so many more perspectives, and that's the beauty of interacting with people and having conversations with people, is you get a new perspective on something from another iteration of yourself that has different experiences than you and a different point of view. But even in those conversations, there's still like a core to the conversation where it's like you can kind of resonate with anything that anyone says, because we have a shared experience, and at our core we are the same thing. It's just me anyway.
Yeah, and that's the narrow path. Like, in the Bible or in the New Testament, Jesus talks about the narrow path traveled by few and the wide path traveled by many. Well, the narrow path is letting go of your idea of yourself. It's the narrowest path. It's quite literally where you're just letting go of the idea of a box at all. And so it's a path that walks itself. It really is. And so that's what we're talking about. And that experience is not something that you can conceptually learn. It's not something that you're ever going to memorize or be able to get to through learning more and more and more concept. It really is just taking it all away. And that's always the same process. What I love about it, that's the whole thing. It's like, it should be simple and applicable. It's the thing that has always driven me, is that there should be no fluff in this conversation, because it should be applicable. And you should be able to have a conversation like this with anyone to some degree and be able to help, not help, but offer an insight that they can take with them. Like, if somebody comes up to you and they're like, are you suffering? Have you turned to Jesus? That's terrible. Whereas if you go up to somebody like, you're having a bad day, it's probably not necessarily what you think it is. It's probably not going to turn out the way that you think it will. You're probably afraid of things that aren't necessarily the whole truth. You're not asking them to take anything with them there. You're telling them that they don't have to carry as much. And that's always applicable. It's always applicable when you start to realize that you're carrying confusion and that you can put it down and find clarity. And that's really it. Well, this has been a blast. I'm going to pass it over to Andrew to wrap this episode up, but I'm looking forward to seeing all of you on our tier 1 call on Patreon if you can join us. And if not, of course, do join us on Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern time for our free group chat.
Yeah. Patreon tier 1, $5 a month in 15 minutes. Looking forward to seeing some of you there, and we will talk to you soon.